Let's continue the conversation on this matter. Joining me now is Professor Everisto Benyera, Professor of African Politics at Unisa. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. The government officials were at pains last week trying to make us understand the distinction between a working visit, which this is, and a state visit. Of course, among the things that we're not going to see come Thursday is all the pomp and ceremony, rolling out of the red carpet and the like. But does that necessarily diminish from the importance of this visit?
Thank you very much, Vuyo, and good afternoon to the viewers. The distinction between a state visit and an official visit aside, the importance of this visit cannot be overestimated given the nature of the wounds that both South Africa and Ukraine are nursing, which have been inflicted one way or the other by the United States. Both countries have been on the receiving end, and both countries are sort of finding common ground in this unpredictable Trump era, where the state has been repossessed towards a transactional state and away from an administrative state. So I see President Volodymyr Zelenskyy coming to begin to see what President Ramaphosa and South Africans have been saying all along, that in this war, we do not only have two sides, the Russian side and its supporters, the Ukrainian side and its supporters, but there is a third part to this war, which is those that are in favor of peace. And South Africa has always been advocating in this war for this third approach to the conflict. Some did not believe it. Some argued that South Africa was more towards Russia and less towards Ukraine. And others are now turning around and saying, is South Africa not risking angering its BRICS and long-time partner, Russia, by entertaining the president of Ukraine? So we are seeing a lot of dynamics coming to play here. But for me, it is the common ground, the post-war Ukraine possibility of a South Africa playing a huge role, not only in infrastructure redevelopment, but in the reconstruction of the souls of the Ukrainian people, borrowing and leaning on our famed model of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Vuyo.
But Prof, you may well be. I mean, we know for a fact that South Africa is trying to find common ground with as many blocs and countries as it can possibly get on the back of being hard done by President Donald Trump and his administration. But conceivably, and I'm asking this on the back of your latter comments, would this visit have gone ahead if South Africa wasn't or didn't know how the Russians would react to it? And I'm saying this also on the back of a visit only last week by International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola to Russia, where he met his counterpart there.
The meeting by Foreign Affairs Minister, International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola to Russia, and the subsequent visit by President Zelenskyy to South Africa are two events that are not mutually exclusive. I read into it South Africa's International Relations Minister going to his Russian counterpart and saying, I am bringing this message from my principal that we are about to receive this president. In the interest of peace, what message can Russia give us to deliver to Ukraine? Because we are in the middle of a negotiated ceasefire by the Americans, which is really stumbling and failing to coalesce. So this is almost like a track to ceasefire negotiation that is being brokered by South Africa. So you are correct. The visit by Lamola and the visit by Zelenskyy are not mutually exclusive. However, the detail lies in the devil. What is it that which South Africa is going to propose to Ukraine? And is that a South African position, or that is a Russian position which Lamola brought to South Africa when he met with Sergei Lavrov? Only time will tell, Vuyo.
But what do you think it is, or it will be, if you were to make a call?
I think South Africa is about to play a very important role, given our ongoing ICJ case against Israel. We still haven't departed the world stage of peacemaking and being like the country that is almost in the middle. If you put my head on the block, I would say that there is a concerted effort by South Africa, Russia, and Ukraine to put an end to the war, not because the two love peace, but because of the withdrawal of the key backers of the war, which is the United States and Europe. We must be aware that the overarching background here is European fatigue, European indirect cost of the war, especially the many factories and industries that are being closed because they no longer have access to Russia's cheap energy, and the unpredictability that is being brought to the international trade arena by the many tariffs that America is imposing, even on its own historical partners. So there is no way in which, given this international background of Trumpism or Trump 2.0, both Ukraine and Russia can still be interested in fighting this war. I think we have now reached the conflict has matured. Both parties are tired. Both parties have realized that neither is able to win the war, and both parties are now ready to negotiate, and they are now ready to listen to anybody who can put a very tangible program of action on the table. And this time it is President Ramaphosa in South Africa for you.
And would it, and this is a question a couple of people put to me at the weekend. What does this all mean, whatever the outcome here, even at a symbolic level? I mean, South Africa giving Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy, a warm welcome. What does that mean, or does that even have implications for South Africa in the context of its rather frosty relations with the Trump administration?
Not only are we going to get a very lucrative market for our citrus in exchange for Russian wheat, but we are going again to rub President Donald Trump the wrong way, because still fresh in our mind is the sort of undiplomatic manner in which President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance treated and almost interrogated President Zelenskyy in a language, because we must understand that English is the third language for President Zelenskyy. So he was in a very tight situation. Then we saw him going to Europe, going to France, going to the United Kingdom, meeting King Charles, and eventually coming to one of the key players in the global south, one of the key players in the BRICS and in the African Union, which is South Africa. So again, we are going to see that Trump and maybe AfriForum and Solidarity will again have something to say about South Africa's foreign policy. But for once, I think the United States should be able to leave South Africa pursue its own foreign policy without hotspotting themselves on our international affairs, which has got nothing to do with their approval or lack thereof.
Outside of geopolitics, do you see trade issues taking a center stage, or could they well be dominated by geopolitics? Because, I mean, you would have heard Wandile Slobo talking about the potential for trade relations between the two countries to go on another and higher level. But of course, I mean, people have already said that, but the geopolitics could simply take over at our expense. In other words, an opportunity could well be squandered, not deliberately, but just by the amount and of pressure that President Cyril Ramaphosa in particular may have to seize this opportunity. And South Africa, again, going back, you said earlier that we haven't left the stage of international relations or our influence in there, and that perhaps that could overshadow everything else to our disadvantage in the end.
The trade aspect, the international trade aspect, cannot be disentangled or divorced from the geopolitics, because they are interlinked and they support each other. For example, I spoke about the shift in the market, the shift in the South African market as a result of the challenges that we are most likely going to face from our participation in the AGOA. So we need a huge market for those goods of South African origin that were destined for the American market. So Ukraine could be one of them. And this is again a soft entry into a very complicated discourse. President Zelenskyy and President Ramaphosa can find a mutual entry point into, I give you wheat, you give me your citrus, I give you wine, you give me cheese. And then they move from that point of agreement into the much more complicated issues, because it is a fact that both Russia and Ukraine are looking for alternative markets for their goods, and so are we. So we can use this opportunity to thaw the eyes and then look for something where at least we know as South Africa that we are going to be successful. We can sign a trade deal. We can announce something very positive, that the visit by President Zelenskyy managed to achieve the following goals. Number one, our markets are going to be open for their wheat. Number two, we are going to export our citruses. We are going to export our wine. We are going to export those goods that were meant for America. Number three, we have agreed to work together to disentangle those supply chain bottlenecks in the Red Sea, in the Sea of Azov, in Russia, and so on and so on. So again, this is something that that is going to be brought in not as a standalone, but as something that is leading to the key aspect of how do we stop the war, how do we negotiate a ceasefire, how do we talk about the territories that Ukraine lost, which Russia is now holding, which amounts to between 21 and 25% of Ukrainian land. And that land, I don't see it getting back to Ukraine. How do we mediate the absence of the United States, as it was the major supporter in terms of doctrine, in terms of funds, in terms of everything, to Ukraine? How do we go forward in the absence of a United States that is withdrawing from the global stage and taking more of a nationalist approach? There are a lot of things that they will have to speak about: the payment security, how to balance these diplomatic issues, and how to get to the root cause of the conflict, which a lot of people do not agree on, depending on where you start your history. Do you start the history of this war with Minsk I? Do you start it with the Bolshevik Revolution? Do you start it with the collapse of the Soviet Union? By the way, Vuyo, the point at which you start your analysis of the current war gives you a different outcome about the causality and the causation of this war.
Quick parting shot, Prof. With all things said, can President Zelenskyy realistically deliver on any promise that he would make to President Ramaphosa, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's trade, given how some of the people who will be protesting, they say he has become weak, he has become discredited, and he is a puppet president?
It's very difficult for President Zelensky to deliver on any promises because, like other observers have said, the war was actually a war between Russia and the United States and Europe on one hand, which was only being fought in Ukraine. Seeing that the major backer of Ukraine is no longer on board 100%, it is very difficult for President Zelensky to make very binding commitments because he does not have the last word. So I see his visit more as a visit that is meant to jack other international players into action. Maybe we are going to see Saudi Arabia, maybe we are going to see Qatar, maybe we are going to see Turkey coming on board and saying, hang on, there is an opportunity for us here to play a major role. But I don't see President Zelensky making very binding commitments. He can agree on a roadmap, but a binding solution is very difficult, especially given Trump 2.0 as the background for you.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Prof. Everisto Benyera, who's Professor of African Politics at Unisa. The people are talking about, of course, will be protesting against President Zelensky's visit are your MK party, whose Secretary General Floyd Shibambu said that they're going to stage a protest. They don't want him to come here because he is a puppet of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. In short, we'll of course be covering that story for you fully and quite extensively tomorrow and on Thursday.